Hi, Jeremy Morgan here, and today I'm going to be talking about Linode web hosting, and this is going to be a review of their hosting, and as you can see by the title, it's the awesomeness that is Linode, so you can tell this is going to be a fairly positive review. Now what I'm going to do first is explain a little bit about the way web hosting used to be. And basically you had three different options, and this is how it's been for a very long time. The old way, the first option you have is hosted. Now, hosted is where your website is hosted in another folder with a bunch of other different websites on a server. Now, the benefits of this were it's easy to use. These options are all still available to this day, I should probably note. But it's easy to use. Somebody else configures it for you. You're basically just uploading your files into a folder and running it on your website. Now the downsides to this is you are hosted with many other sites, first off. So if another site gets busy, you know, they hit the front page of Reddit, it's going to take the whole server down to a crawl, including your site. So that's the first disadvantage. Also, if they go down, you go down, which means if they do some kind of configuration that locks up the server, it's going to take your site down too. Now this is very cheap. Hosted is probably the cheapest option, usually for under 10 bucks a month, so it's kind of you get what you pay for. But another problem with hosted services is there's a standard configuration, so you get the same configuration as everybody else. Different hosting providers will give you different options, but it all depends on the provider. And another downside is the Google bad neighborhood penalty. Google and other also proxy providers who are providing proxy services for their companies, if there's a different type of website hosted with yours, say an adult site or a malware site or a spam site on that same server, you can get grouped into that same group with Google and with other problems. Like you can have a proxy come up that says, hey, this is an adult site, because they do IP-based filtering and they filtered out this adult site, and they've also filtered out your site, which can be completely G-rated. So these are some of the disadvantages with the hosted environment. And basically, it's only something you'd want to do to save money for a very simple site. But it's not a very good solution, to be honest. And the second one is colocation. Now here's another option where you can actually pack your PC down to a data center, plug it into the pipe, and run it. Now, this is being done less and less these days, but for a while in the early 2000s it was very popular because the configuration's all yours. You can put Windows on it, Linux, whatever configuration you want. You want to run cutting-edge, bleeding-edge software, nobody cares. I mean, you could do anything on this server that you want within laws. Now, there's a plus to that in that the configuration's all yours. You don't have to worry about these bad neighborhood penalties, and you can do whatever you want with the server. So there's a lot of freedom there. The downside is it can be expensive. Not only the colocation itself, but putting together a server can be very expensive. You have to buy all the hardware yourself up front, and if that hardware fails, you have to pay for it. And also, you also have to have someone come down and reboot it sometimes when it's completely locked up. You got to call up, 3 in the morning. Maybe somebody's going to come down and reboot, maybe not. It depends on the colocation provider. So those are some of the downsides there. Scaling is also harder with colocation because you got to go fork out a few $1,000s for another server if things get busy. So scaling is a big downside to that as well. And we have managed services, which probably the most popular option today for enterprise is managed services, where you have a set of servers and they're managed by people who install and configure everything for you. And these are also very expensive. Rackspace is probably the biggest provider, and they're very expensive, but you're paying for quite a bit. They've got techs who will come in, they'll reconfigure your software, they'll reconfigure hardware. Something breaks, they're there, but again, it's very expensive. It can be thousands of dollars easily for these managed services. And it's not that it's not worth it, but for a small business, it's very tough to come up with that. And with managed services, you may or may not get control over your PC. They might have a standard software stack that they want you to stick to, that's known stable. So there's some pluses and minuses to that also. You don't fall into the bad neighborhood penalty because generally if you're doing managed services, you've got your own server. So that's usually not a problem. And now we have the new way, which is how there's a whole bunch of different services out here. Today we're talking about Linode that does this, and the new way is we've got the data centers here, and there's several different data centers with a bank of servers in them. Each of those servers runs a virtualized instance, as you can see here, and it's basically a slice. And what a virtualized instance is let's say you have one Linux computer that's a server, and its job is to serve up these virtual machines, and it has, you know, say 20 different virtual machines on it. Each of those is also a Linux instance that's running virtually. So what you have is a big, giant, powerful server with a bunch of small servers on it that you would put your site on. And as far as you're concerned, it's the same thing. You're basically, it's just like you're SSHing into an actual hardware server, but it's a virtual server. So it can be shut down, it can be changed and modified, things like that. And that's kind of what we'll get into. And this is the way that web hosting is going, for sure. I mean, Windows, Azure, Linode, all these different services, Rackspace, they're doing what's called cloud hosting, which is basically these slices here that you see on these big servers, and the servers are distributed amongst the internet so that the server is close to the person that's going to it. You have redundancy, and you get rid of a lot of the problems that I talked about, like configuration problems, okay? You can configure your own slice however you want, for the most part. And you don't have the bad neighborhood penalties. You don't have as many hardware problems because the hardware is generally managed at the big server and not a small server. So you'll notice that hardware problems are a lot less, but the most important thing is scalability. These slices are instances on a server, so creating another one is fairly easy. If you want to double your server, you can clone it, and it's just like taking a server and cloning it in real life and plugging it in, and all of a sudden you have two servers that are both hosting your website. And it's the way of the future, and I think this is the way that web hosting is going to be going. And Linode is the one that I'm talking about today that I have one of my servers on. And what they do is they do virtual Linux servers in a cloud. They've got 6 different data centers, and they've put a web interface on it that is just awesome. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and log into one of my server accounts here. As you can see, we have a nice little web interface here. And what I have here is a Linode 768 is what it's called, and that means it has 768 megs of RAM. And as you can see here, we have Linode. We'll go ahead and click on it. One thing I should point out, it shows here that I'm in Fremont, California. And they have 6 different data centers, as I said, spread out, and you can create Linodes on any of those different locations. So if you want to create redundancy, or you want to create some localized where you have a local version of your site being served closer to that person's location, Linode makes it very easy to do so. And here I could show you, this is how we add a server. And as you can see, the prices are really reasonable, but we've got a Linode 512, which is 512 megs of RAM, 20 gig of storage, 200 gig of transfer, $19.95. I can select this, select my payment terms, and continue, and that's essentially, I've just provisioned myself a server within minutes. And that's something that you wouldn't get with any of those other 3 options. You can provision servers, of course, but having it done in minutes is just physically impossible. No matter how good the company is, they're not going to be able to put a server together for you in minutes and have it up and running. But Linode, it makes that possible. So let's go in and manage a little bit here. You can see my configuration profile. I have my Gen 2 profile, which what I did is I put Gen 2 Linux on the slice. I have 32-bit kernel. You can change the run levels here, so if we have some kind of problem where you need to go into single user mode, it's very easy. There's a memory limit. Most people probably wouldn't use that, but there are good reasons to limit your memory sometimes. If you're trying to throttle back your traffic or you're doing some kind of experiment. And you see here we have block device assignments. And block devices are basically hard drive partitions. And I put all mine on one partition and did a swap image, but you can do pretty much anything you want in here. You can split up your var, your user, things like that. A lot of people like to do that, and it's very easy to do here. And I could select the root device here, and there's some file system boot helpers here, as you can see, and this is for just different configurations, you know, depending on what you want to do. They make it very easy. And in the next tab here we have remote access. And I should probably point out, before we go farther, we can go to rebuild here. Now let's say I totally bork my install of Gentoo. I can select rebuild, and I can either rebuild another Gentoo distribution, or I can select from any of these. You can see Arch, Debian, Fedora, SUSE, Slack, I mean all of them. They've got just tons of them. You can do your disk size, different sizes, and it's really easy. Within a few minutes you can reboot everything, redo it, and have a fresh install to reconfigure and do what you want with. Linode is much more than web hosting. It's a virtual Linux server on the internet. So I mean, you can do whatever you want with it. If you want to make a game server, if you want to make a chat server, DNS, whatever. It's not just limited to web, but that's what I'm using it for and what a lot of people use it for. Another thing here I forgot to show you is we've got different kernels we can use. And what they've done is compiled a set of kernels for each operating system. So there's tons of them here to choose from. If you want to go back to something old, legacy, for whatever reason, there's just lists of them. Okay, so we'll go back to remote access. Now you have your standard SSH access, which is how most people like to administer their Linux servers. You can also have graphical administration. You can put webmin on there, or cPanel, or things like that. If you'd rather manage everything over the web rather than the prompt, you can do that. I choose to do it over SSH and do everything through the prompt. So we have an SSH option. It's already installed and it's already ready to go as soon as you flash your OS. And what I've done is I've added a static IP so we don't get into that bad neighborhood thing that we were talking about earlier. You can select one public IP per server for free, and you can add additional ones for $1. So we'll get into that hardware part later. There's DNS resolvers here, and there's also something called Lish. Now this is something that I never used before until getting the Linode service, so I was unfamiliar with it, but this is a web-based SSH console. And as you can see, I was already logged in before, but you do have to log in. But you can go in here and just do normal SSH commands over the web. So if for some reason you're behind a firewall, you're at a public library, you need to jump on your server really quick, all you have to do is log into the website, and there's a web-based SSH server for you. So it's very convenient. You can change your password, use SSH keys, and it's just really for convenience. You probably wouldn't want to do everything over Lish because it's just a little bit slower and it behaves a little differently between different browsers. But for an emergency purpose, it's awesome. Next tab we have Rebuild, which I kind of already showed you. You can select your operating system's rebuild. You can also use Stackscripts, also a very awesome option. Okay, so you have Linode LampStack, WordPress, all these different configurations, and these Stackscripts will install things for you and really automate it, which is awesome. I mean, that's a great way. These guys at Linode, I'm guessing, have done so many of these configurations that they just have it down pat. I mean, everything I've deployed on here has just worked, and that's very important, especially if you're running a business, is to just have things just work without worrying about it. We have a rescue option also here, where you can go into rescue mode if something happens to your server. Again, if you bork it, you can reset your root password in case you forget it or it becomes corrupted. They have a web-based interface for that. Here's resize. Now here's one of the biggest selling points of Linode by far as far as scalability. What I talked about is if you get on the front page of Reddit every day or Slashdot, all of a sudden, you know, your server's choking. You can come in here and select another. I've got the 768. You can select a gig of RAM, up to 20 gig of RAM. And as you can see, it says we estimate 23 minutes to migrate your Linode. Now that might seem like a lot, but that's wonderful, because if you're still living in the hardware space and you need to add a server or you need to add memory, getting it done in 23 minutes is very unlikely for even the best of services, just because of the physical limitations of having to shut down a server and rebuild it, put it together. If you want to go from 2 processors to 4, you've got a whole different configuration. So 23 minutes is an excellent time to scale up. And scalability is the biggest thing that with Linode here that I could see their biggest advantage is the scalability. If your business just takes off, I mean, that same day, you can be duplicating everything and creating a big space, and you're ready to go. And you can slim it back down if things go away. This is very important for startups. You know, if you get on the front page of TechCrunch, all of a sudden you've got to start scaling things. The clone option is exactly what I talked about earlier, where I can just clone this Gen 2 server and have 2 of them. And that would be good for load balancing, things like that, or maybe I have a node balancer set up here. But basically you can just clone the machines, and it's like a magic wand waving and creating another server pretty much on the fly. And it's definitely a great option for startups and people that expect to scale very quickly. Now, as you can see here, my last 30 days, we have a graph that shows the traffic coming in, shows the network traffic, disk I/O, and you can go back to different months. You can go through the last 24 hours and see how traffic has been and how your server's holding up. And that's a great option for just getting a good glance at how things are going and whether or not you need to start scaling. Here's our backups. There's a Linode backup system, so it backs up everything for you. Definitely a good option. One of the downsides of virtualized environments are they can become corrupted because they live on a file system. So having a good backup is always a good idea no matter what, but it's still with virtualized services, you still do need backups. Here are our settings. We have a shutdown watchdog, which can be very helpful if your server power's off. There's it's basically if you have any problems, it'll assign a boot job, it'll boot it back up and get you back on the road again. You can also set thresholds, which are very useful. CPU usage, disk I/O rate. Again, if you're getting nailed by the front page of TechCrunch, or you're getting a DOS attack against you, something like that, this can kind of limit it and mitigate it until you can handle and fix the problem. And there's extras. Everybody loves extras. You can add RAM, just like that. The prices are super reasonable. As you can see, if you just want to keep the same server, the same basic size, but you just need RAM, or you just need a little more storage, they make it real cheap and real easy to just put it on here. Here's the IP addresses. Again, $1 a month. Having separate IP addresses for separate servers is very important. For the Google Bad Neighborhood penalty, and for just not being associated with bad stuff. It's definitely worth $1 a month. So they also have these node balancers that you can set up, and what this does is basically balances the different nodes. So if you create a bunch of nodes, you can clone a bunch of machines, say you have 5 of them, you can split the traffic between all of them, and it's definitely a good way to go. You can also set up a database server, a web server, and a DNS server, a mail server, all of these different servers, and tie them all together with Linode. And can you imagine doing that for a couple $100 compared to setting it up in the hardware world, which would be thousands? The DNS manager, okay, if you're not the type of person that likes to run your own DNS, this is a great, easy way to do it. You can go in here and add your different name server records. You can add A records, CNAME, anything you could add through DNS. If you don't want to run your own DNS server, Linode will do it for you. And as you can see, changes take effect every quarter hour. I've done a few changes here, as you can see, and it's just been really fast and really easy. I've ran my own DNS in the past. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, but it is kind of nice to have this web-based interface to just go in, throw in a CNAME record, and get out. And there's a support system. I haven't had to use it yet, so I can't really say anything about the support. But I think not having to use the support says something about the service in itself, because I haven't had any downtime, I haven't had any slowness, I haven't had any problems whatsoever with this. It's just been really open and shut, clean type of deal. You've got your account management stuff here with your payments, things like that. But everything is managed over the web. There's also some documentation. The documentation, I have had to hit that a few times, and it's very good. I mean, I wanted to set up an Nginx server on Gen 2. I'd never really set it up before. I've always been an Apache guy, so I came in here. They have everything I need to get it set up. I have it set up and ready to go, and I think it's very helpful. So my overall review of this Linode service is it's well worth the money. I mean, there's no question that for $20 a month, $30 a month, this is the best hosting option. You will have to learn a little bit of Linux. It's not going to be all push-button web-based stuff, but you don't have to learn as much as you would have to learn 10 years ago setting up your own Linux server. They put almost everything here on the web. They've got plenty of documentation. You could sit down for a weekend, figure out what you're doing, set up a Linux server, and be ready to go. So I think this is the future of web hosting. This is the way it's going to go and the way it's going to be, and I embrace such changes. The cloud is awesome as far as redundancy and scalability. And in today's world, your startup could be having 50 hits a day, and then the next day you can have 10,000. And if you're hosting on something like Linode, you can scale up and scale down as much as you need to. If you have any questions about this, you can contact me, jeremymorgan@gmail.com, or find me on Twitter, Google+, any of those services, and I'll be glad to answer any of your questions about Linode, as well as their support service. You can call them, but just decided I would give a review. I haven't been paid or endorsed in any way. It's just something I decided to do. They don't even know about it. But I decided to share it with people because I think this is a great way to host your website. Thank you.